Hello, my name is Keith. I'm a physicist and I'm also a practicing Buddhist. I have been teaching physics for 15 years now, since 2010, and I've been practicing Buddhism since 2007. I have a moderately unsuccessful YouTube channel in which I teach GCSE and A-level physics. I'm the head of department, family man, and I've been training for ordination in Buddhism for quite a few years now as well. A few students have asked me about my practice, and a few of them even suggested that it'd be good if I do video series where I talk about Buddhism and what Buddhism means to me, and maybe we can explore Buddhism together. The problem is I don't really want to put that on my physics YouTube channel, so I've started another channel to explore Buddhism with you. So let's answer a few questions, common questions that I get from some of my students. So this is a common question. What type of Buddhist am I? It's not an easy question to answer, actually. When I started exploring Buddhism back in 2007, the type of Buddhism that I focused on was Theravada. I was attracted to the pragmatism, I was attracted to the language of the Pali Canon and how it's been translated by great scholar monks like Bhikkhu Bodhi and Nyanamoli and Analayo and so on. So I was really attracted to these particular texts and the language that was used and the systematic approach to dealing with the problem of human suffering. So I started practicing Theravada. I started meditating and learned to meditate after I attended a 6-week introduction to Buddhism course at a group in Manchester called the Manchester Buddhist Centre, which was run by a group which was at the time called the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order. They've since changed their name to Triratna, the Triratna Buddhist Order. And they taught me how to meditate, and they taught me some of the basics of Buddhism as well, and what Sangha means and that sort of thing. I decided to go it alone, so to speak, started practicing Theravada and reading just the Pali Canon because I was most attracted to that part of Buddhism. But I was missing something in my practice, and I found that what I was missing was the community. When I would attend things at a local Theravada Buddhist centre in Manchester, the majority of people who were attending didn't speak English or they didn't speak it very well. Most of the advertising was in Thai with a little bit of English on the posters. It was that sort of thing. And it kind of felt like I was gate crashing someone's family barbecue. It was that sort of feeling to it. And I missed this sense of Sangha. I missed this sense of community. So I went to Triratna again, but I wasn't able to get there until I moved down to Essex, moved back down to Essex, I should say. I'm from Essex originally. And then I was able to get in touch with the Mid-Essex Buddhist Centre, and I've been attending the Mid-Essex Buddhist Centre for about 5 years now. So there was a big chunk of time where I was practicing Theravada, but I wouldn't think of myself as a Theravada Buddhist now because a lot of my practice involves Mahayana texts and even some Vajrayana texts and ideas. But I also wouldn't call myself Mahayanist or Vajrayanist because of my affection towards the Theravada. Now, what you'll find in the real world of Buddhism is they don't care so much about these divisions, this sectarianism, quite so much. It seems to be a very Western thing to draw a little box around a type of practice and say, this is what type of Buddhist you are. And if you're studying GCSE RS, GCSE Religious Studies, you might suddenly learn that there are these types of Buddhism, but actually in the real world it doesn't quite work that way. So the scholar monk Bhikkhu Bodhi, who is a Theravadan monk, ordained as a Theravadan monk, he lives and works in a monastery which is a Mahayana monastery. You see, the lines get blurred a bit, and in reality, as long as you're focused on your practice and you are effectively practicing, you can find Buddhist community with all sorts of other Buddhists indeed. Have I always been a Buddhist? No. No, I haven't. So my journey is quite an interesting one. I was raised an atheist and I was interested in religion. I was interested in the nature of reality, actually, and how the universe worked. It's one of the reasons I got into physics. And during my time at university, I dabbled and experimented with a few different religious traditions and practices. I settled for quite a few years with the Salvation Army. I loved the music there because I am a musician as well. And I loved the sense of community that they had. They also had a policy of not drinking, teetotalism, and I went right off alcohol during my time at towards the end of my time at university. I drank way too much while I was at university, but I went right off alcohol towards the end of that time. And so I quite liked the fact that they didn't have sacraments such as bread and wine and all this sort of things. It felt a little bit false. However, one day while I was doing a service with the Salvation Army, I'd just been made a soldier in the Salvation Army, and I had an epiphany that I didn't believe in God. And that made it quite difficult to be a salvationist if I didn't believe in God. So I started exploring again. And there's actually a friend of mine who became the best man at my wedding who told me about these Tibetan monks who were being taught physics as part of their ordination training. I thought, well, this is interesting. And I learned that the Dalai Lama said very clearly if at any point science disproves part of Buddhism, then Buddhism has to change. It's wrong. You've got to follow the evidence. And I found that quite attractive. A religion not based on faith, but based on evidence was something that definitely appealed to me because I'd been trained as a physicist. So that was how I started getting into it and started reading about it. And I kind of took the plunge and started reading it properly and attending courses in 2007. What religion were my parents? We can extend this, I suppose, my wife, my family as well. So my wife doesn't have a religion, and my daughter doesn't have a religion, although she's being christened. But at the christening, I said to the vicar very clearly that I wasn't prepared to lie and say that I'm going to raise her as a Christian, and the vicar was fine with that. So my family unit, me, my wife, and my daughter, I'm the only religious one in that family, and I'm a Buddhist. My daughter is interested, but I'm not pushing it on her. And if she asks me questions, I'll answer them. But we don't sort of study together and forced prayers and all this sort of thing. When I was growing up, my household was atheist. I would almost say anti-religious, although we would attend christenings and weddings and funerals, hatchers, matchers, and dispatchers, as the saying goes. But actually, my family were quite anti-religious. So that was the sort of environment I grew up in. Do I believe in reincarnation? Um, so the word reincarnation, I would say no, because reincarnation is about the soul moving from one body to another upon death of the body. It's about an immortal soul, an Atman, moving, Atman is a Sanskrit word, moving from one body to another, to another, to another. And each time that Atman is supposed to progress and move closer to God, to Brahman, and eventually it reach moksha or nibbana, enlightenment. Now, I don't believe in that because I can't reconcile the idea of an immortal soul, an eternal soul, with what I understand from the physics. I find that difficult. So what I do believe in is causality. I believe in conditioned co-production or dependent origination, or as it is in Sanskrit, praticca samuppada. Sometimes it's called this, that conditionality, which roughly says from this, that arises. With the ceasing of this, that ceases. If this does not arise, if this does not happen, that doesn't happen. If that does happen, that does happen. Cause and effect. And I do believe in cause and effect, causality. Big part of special relativity is about causality and how to check if things can be causally linked or are not causally linked. So I believe in causality, and I also believe in the responsibility for an individual for their ethical conduct. And I believe that one's ethical conduct has consequences beyond their own life. If one behaves ethically, then there are people after that person's death who will not suffer quite as much or may even benefit from their ethical conduct. And I believe that if someone behaves unethically, the ripples of that go on through time after their death as well. And not just death, it happens during life. But there's other ideas. So within one life, if you think about what makes me me, it's my body. I contain a head with a brain in it. I contain limbs and heart and lungs and everything else. But all of those are made out of cells, and those cells die and are reproduced and replaced and so on. I eat, I drink, I breathe, I respire. And so there's a process, a constant process of replacement of the matter in my body. So that the matter in my body now is not the matter that was in my body 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So, in a very literal materialist sense, I'm not the same person now as I was 10 years ago. And yet there's a sense of continuity from that person to this person. So you may say, well, maybe that's mind. But then I've got a question of what is mind. If mind is memories, then I can't remember what I had for lunch yesterday. My memory is very faulty, and in fact, my memory of events can be different from somebody else's memory of the same events. Memory is flawed, so the idea of a continuity of memory doesn't quite work either. So then we think maybe it's not memory, maybe it's consciousness. If I get knocked unconscious, have I ceased to be? Because I can become conscious again, and there's the continuity. So consciousness itself seems a little bit ephemeral, and we can't really pin down some eternal consciousness that moves along throughout my life. Consciousness comes in moments, and each consciousness leads to the next, but I wouldn't say it's a continuous stream of a single consciousness. It's more the passing of causality from one consciousness to the next. So in Buddhism, we don't teach reincarnation, although sometimes it's translated that way, mainly for Western audiences. But we teach what's called punabhava, or rebecoming, sometimes translated as rebirth. And that is the idea that everything that happens, including the birth of a person, happens due to previous causes. Consequences happen due to causes. Things don't just happen randomly. And that's something that I do subscribe to. I can see that. It makes a lot of sense to me. Now, whether or not there is a single passage of this consciousness passed from one consciousness to the next, to the next, to the next, and upon the death of a body, then the next instant of consciousness that arises in a person is somehow conditioned by a previous consciousness from a different person. I don't know what mechanism would be responsible for that. So I hold that lightly. I wouldn't say I believe it, but I also wouldn't say I dismiss it, because there's an awful lot I don't understand. And I don't want to go down the God of the Gaps route and say, I absolutely believe in reincarnation because I don't understand X, Y, Z. That's not a healthy way, I think, to look at the universe. So I hold it lightly, and I don't believe in it, I don't disbelieve it, I just wait and let's see. I mean, we're all going to die, so I guess we're all going to find out eventually. Yes, this is a question I get quite a lot. I'm a vegan, or sometimes it's framed as I don't drink alcohol. Is that because I'm a Buddhist? So, no, it's not. That's not the case. You've got it back to front. It's more a case of my religion is informed by my morality, my ethical conscience, rather than my morality or my ethical conscience is informed by my religion. Now that's quite a tricky concept, and I know a lot of people would say that their morality is informed by their religion, and there are lots of examples out in all different religions across the world, and there will of course be some Buddhists who drink and then decide to stop drinking because of the fifth precept, which is to abstain from intoxicants. But there's a bit more to it. Buddhists wouldn't say alcohol is sinful, and it's because of that I'm not going to drink alcohol. It's more a case of I saw the danger and I saw the downside to drinking alcohol and decided to abandon drinking alcohol. And that is the same with eating meat and then all animal products. Now, it could well be that my conscience was informed by my religious practice, but it's not the case that my religious practice is the reason for my moral code. It's not that. It's a more subtle relationship than that. Buddhism doesn't forbid you from doing things, but through Buddhist training, you can find that some things that you once thought were okay for you to do, you can see the danger in them and decide not to do them. Now, that process for me started before I was a Buddhist. And I don't think I'd be happy joining a religion that told me to do things or not to do things, because that takes away agency from the individual. And then, is it moral to abstain from something just because you're told not to? Now, I'm going to do a whole video all about morality within Buddhism and ethics within Buddhism, because I think that's a really good topic. But hopefully that's a starting point. Do I worship the Buddha? Right. It depends on what you mean by the word worship. So the word worship in the West, in English, is quite a loaded term, tends to be used for within Christianity, for example, or Islam or Judaism. If we talk about Christianity and Islam and Judaism, they all have the same idea, which is that you must worship only one God, and have no other gods before that God. Some even going as far, most even going as far as saying there are no other gods. There are false gods, but they are not actually gods. And you must worship God and God alone. And so seeing things like me sitting next to a statue of the Buddha may make them feel uncomfortable, because they'll think that I'm worshipping the statue. And when I perform prostrations to the statue, when I bow down to it, when I make offerings to it, that can look an awful lot like worship. But this is a symbol that represents enlightenment, or the perfection of human consciousness. This is a symbol that represents the abolition of suffering. This is a symbol that represents perfect wisdom and compassion. And so would I say, would I worship? Do I worship perfect wisdom and compassion? Well, I guess yes, I do, in the sense that I venerate perfect wisdom and compassion. I worship and venerate the idea of a perfect humanity, the best that a human can be. The idea of the abolition of suffering, abolishing all suffering, that is something I think is worth submitting to. But it's not a submission in a blind faith and a giving up of rights sort of submission and giving up of will sort of submission. It's a recognition and an acknowledgement that I'm not perfect. And I can agree with that. I'm not perfect. So the fact that I'm not perfect means that I feel inclined to look for something that is perfect that I can use to orientate my life. And I found that the Buddha does a very good job of that. So do I worship the Buddha? In a sense, yes. But in a Christian sense, I would say possibly not. But I also worship the Dharma and the Sangha. And the Sangha includes the fellowship of other Buddhists. So my Buddhist friends, in a sense, I worship them too. And they worship me. But it's all done as a pragmatic way of trying to recognize our own flaws and try to improve ourselves. It's not a pessimistic thing of, oh, I'm useless. It's none of that. It's about progress and improvement and transformation. And I think that's important, that we do recognize where we are at and where we want to be. Do I chant? Well, okay, this usually comes in the form of, do I chant? Do I meditate? Do I pray? So I suppose in answer to all of those, yes. Now, what does meditation look like? It's very interesting to look at. It's just me sat on a cushion with my eyes closed. A lot's going on in here. A lot of what's going on is trying to sometimes stop what's going on in there. It's complicated. There are practices that we use to train the mind, and a lot of that is done on the cushion during meditation. But actually, a lot of that happens during my day-to-day life, where I have to be very mindful in my everyday life. Chanting is an act of worship, an act of obeisance, and again, it's all about this recognition of the fact that I'm aspiring to something which is better than me. And so chanting is a way of taking us out of ourselves and recognizing that we are not the center of the universe. And prayers, again, in the West, prayer is quite a loaded term. It can be about praise for something or a being greater than us. And certainly we do that, part of the process of dissolving our own little ego. But prayers can also take a different form. A prayer could be a petition for something. We don't really do that in Buddhism, but we can do. And there are Buddhist prayers, and they are all about recognizing that we don't have all the answers. So again, it's a pragmatic practice in order to try to um, remind ourselves and train ourselves to realize that there is more to this universe than just us. And we should recognize that we don't have all the answers. I mean, Buddhism itself, tripping over my words because I'm flawed, Buddhism itself says that once you've become a Buddha, you don't need Buddhism anymore. The Buddha was not a Buddhist. So we're not saying, oh, we pray and we meditate and we chant and that is Buddhism and you do that forever and ever and ever and ever. A being who becomes enlightened, I'm a long way off that, never met an enlightened person, I think most people would agree. But theoretically, a being who's reached enlightenment doesn't need Buddhism anymore. They don't need the 5 precepts and ethical practice anymore. It's a natural expression of who they are. And that's what we aspire to. And to aspire to that, we need a pragmatic and practical set of guidelines and instructions to get there. And so prayers, meditation, and chanting is all part of that process. Well, I hope you found that interesting. I'm going to answer any other questions. If you put them in the comments, I'm happy to answer those questions for you. But I also intend to do a few other little videos where I talk about some other important aspects of Buddhism. I don't have all the answers. I'm not going to pretend to have all the answers. But it's about me exploring Buddhism with you. And maybe you'll get something out of it.